Hello and welcome to episode 422 of the Crate and Crowbar. I'm the poorly reassembled fossil of Chris Thurston, and joining me on this auspicious evening is squelching graveyard cadaver Marsh Davies.
Hello!
And a true revenant from the beyond, an eerie whisper of Alex Wiltshire.
I am risen.
Oh, he's quieter than ever. Will the noise cancellation finally catch him completely? Listen on to find out.
None shall cancel me.
Oh, don't say that, Alex. You're getting on. And we're all getting on as it happens. So as I've already said, or I believe I've said, I've already forgotten. Tonight is the 19th of July, 2023. Would you believe it? 10 years ago, on this very evening or day, the 19th of July 2013, we launched crateandcrowbar.com and posted our first ever episode of this podcast. That's the response that deserves.
Stunned silence.
Absolutely, like we didn't know this was happening. This is the 10th anniversary of the Crate and Crowbar. What a fact that is. Anyone got any feelings about this? Have I hung too much of a lampshade on it already? What does it mean to you, Marsh?
Oh, I tell you what.
That's 10 years.
I tell you what.
10 years sigh.
I did actually go back and try and look for like predictions that we had made across the course of the last 10 years. I didn't find any. I spent an inordinate amount of time looking for us to say something insightful about the future of games, and we never do. With one exception, actually, which to the credit of longtime listener and a wondrous wizard Payne, who found this for me, thankfully. In fact, can you guess who says that Minecraft will eventually be bought by Microsoft and incorporated into Windows? This is in episode 39 of the Crate Crowbar. So in 2014. That's how long ago it was.
That feels like Graham to me.
Yeah, it does. It's quite Graham-y.
It was Pip.
Huh.
Pip was the only person to say something correct in the entire 10 years that this podcast has been going on. Who thinks, in fact, there was one other prediction that amused me. You, Chris, in fact, said that you might even see an esports tournament run at E3. It will be casters up on stage commenting a 15-minute match as part of the E3 conference. And then Tom Francis asks, do you think there'll ever be a PC conference at E3? And you say, no.
Well, I mean, to be fair, all of it was annihilated, wasn't it? So, yeah.
That's true. Your prediction came true eventually.
Yeah. That was, I mean, I've said some real bollocks over the years, haven't I? Let's be honest.
That was also Kane's finding, I should hasten to add.
When did I say that? Did I say that before I was even working in esports media? Because I'm not sure the me that worked in esports would have believed that 5 years ago.
Episode 2.
Oh.
So, yeah, quite.
God, I was 25 years old. I knew nothing.
Did you guys have like a favorite game across the last 10 years? Can you pick something out as being the best game that was released during the duration of this podcast has been going?
Oh my God, Marsh. What kind of question is that? I think I have an answer though, actually.
Oh,
it suddenly popped into my head. I was wondering if you were going to ask something like this. I kept thinking about things like I was thinking about these amazing things like the game I've forgotten the name of, which was really, really quite meaningful to me. The one where you go into space,
Outer Wilds.
Outer Wilds, yeah,
memorable.
Games are just extraordinary. But then I got back into Slay the Spire, and that game just won't just go away from my head, and it won't stop entertaining me. And it won't stop beating me and make me want to come back to it. And that, it just seems endlessly bottomless. And it could be, yeah, I went there.
Bottomfully endful.
But Is that a 10-year game? Could be. Because I think
mean,
any 10-year game has to be bottomly endful.
Yeah. I mean, could it be as, I mean, because 10 years is not forever. Contrary to what Guns N' Roses once said, it isn't. So if a game is truly bottomful, then presumably it would last 10 years and beyond. So the measure is the next 10 years of this podcast.
Could be like Monopoly or something, then, he's saying.
Well, just bad. I think those are both very good choices, actually, to be honest. Like, I've been thinking about this a bit, partly because I asked literally this question in our private Discord. I don't want to give the game away here too much, but all of that, fainting and get the smelling salts, I haven't heard such a question before, was beautifully performed. But let's all be honest with each other, complete horseshit, because we've all been thinking about this for days. Because there are obvious answers for me, right? Like games that were kind of epochal over the last decade that begin with a D, and I can't probably get away with recording any kind of reflection on the last 10 years of my life playing games without mentioning Dota or Destiny. But those aren't the ones that jumped out to me, actually. Outer Wilds is another one for me, like in the sense of in the previous time, the time before 2013, we might be talking about, and someone was like, I want to play a video game to understand what video games can be as entertainment. A lot of the time, my answer to that was Portal, or Portal 1 and Portal 2. It's not because they're necessarily the best games ever, but because it's like, if you want to show somebody the potential of a interactive space and have them be entertained and so on, I think it's a fairly safe bet. And actually, I would pick out a Wilds now. I think it's a little bit less obviously like a kind of entertaining performance than Portal, but it is such a great use of the medium. So that's up there for me as well. The other one for me is Hunt Showdown. Like when I really came to think about it, taking the battle royale or the the extraction shooter or whatever people want to call them now as one of those genres that we weren't talking about or thinking about at all 10 years ago. I think it's the best one. I think it, and I can talk about it. I mean, it's the thing I've been playing the most recently in terms of what I might even talk about later. So I'll probably return to it, but I think it stands up for me as, even though I've never considered myself like an expert player of it, partly because it is possible to play hundreds of hours of a game and remain a miserable little shitty cowboy alone in the swamp. But yeah, I think it's given it's a game I talked about, I think, on the podcast years ago when I got the very early access version and didn't know quite what to make of it. The fact that I find it hard to fault in the most important aspects of its design probably makes it stand up for me as one of the games of that period.
A noble choice. I was also thinking of Hunt Showdown as a possible pick, but then I don't know. I was also tempted by Disco Elysium, and I feel like it's too. In some ways, it's like it's too easy, obvious of a pick because it's a game that wrestles with a lot of big philosophies in a very overt way, and it kind of feels a little bit like I'm just going for a game with like a very high-minded in a textual way, which is divorced from the kind of experience of it as a game. It's not a very ludic game, or at least it is, but it's not as ludic a choice as like Slay the Spire or something like that, which is just pure delicious mechanism. It's
just lewd all the way.
There's a lot of what is good about Disco Elysium is just text. So I feel like a bit of a failure picking it, but I don't think it's totally true. Like I think a lot of what I admire about it is the design of its narrative choices and the way that structures that your inner dialogue as like a conflict between what in other role-playing games would be your ability stats and how that sort of internality relates with the dialogue choices that are available to you. And it sort of supersedes of a lot of what you might think of as being like a sort of the game of dialogue that you get in other games like Mass Effect or whatever, where because here the choices that you're making aren't really about beating a conversation minigame and extracting what you want from it. They're much more about expressing your character and all of its flaws in a way which is true to them. And to find a way of doing that through like interactive choices is I think justifiably gamey to be able to pick it.
I think it's quite a lot of game in there. like, if there's game in the kind of like the choices of the kind of skill checks you're going to go for, you can craft a character in a gamey kind of way. Your choices aren't purely about min-maxing, but they're about creating a character that you want, honing one,
and the choices you make don't end up being good either. Like, I mean, regardless of whether you pass a given skill check, you might find that by overemphasizing one part of your psyche, you end up being backed into like these conversational cul-de-sacs where your only choices are to say awful things or things that are totally detrimental because one part of your brain has dominated another, and you've sort of like pushed your character into this pachinko machine of psycho-philosophical despair, and you've bounced all the way down until you hit a box at the bottom labeled dickhead. And I think that's
podcasting.
We've talked a lot over the many years about sort of the qualities in games that allow you to fail in interesting ways, that encourage you not to reload because you failed at something you thought you wanted. And Disco Elysium really does embrace failure and encourages you to kind of roll with all the terrible things that happen with you, because it always finds some sort of meaning within failure, and that's like a really amazing thing about it.
Was Bloodborne?
I was about to say Bloodborne. Yeah,
in your lists, yeah. Because Jamie was talking last week about how he returns to Bloodborne as a sort of safe space.
Whoa, that guy!
And no, I agree with him though. But I think there's a bunch of games that even if they aren't the games I put the most hours into, they're the games that I would happily be buried in, which, as we alluded to in our introduction, is now more of a pressing concern than it was when we started this podcast. But things where like puzzle games, particularly like Manifold Garden and The Witness, and even like once you get past the main storyline of it, games like Red Dead Redemption 2, which offer this sort of like pastoral infinity for you to while away the rest of your life in
absolutely a bottomful cowboy experience.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about the Hitman collection now that it's all bundled into one thing.
That's
a kind of international holiday simulator, just as a series of, I think I've made that comment about it on the podcast many times before, but that game as a summation of what sort of AAA action games were in this period. It's one of the better examples, I think. I would put Bloodborne at the top of that list, though, for me, in terms of adventure experiences, I suppose.
There is a game that sort of... So I actually went back to it, maybe... I'll reveal what it is in a minute, but I felt I definitely ought to be playing this game. But I went back to it properly, playing it with some friends, and having a really nice time. And he's reminded me just how good it is, how sort of free and open, but, how kind of warm it is. And it's also a game that's kind of been in at least the periphery of my life for 2014 to now, so nearly coming up to 10 years, and that's Minecraft. And I think that definitely for me it's definitely more significant to me than Slay the Spire, but because I work for on Minecraft, it's kind of, I can't really see it as a holiday like Slay the Spire might be, but I think that it is probably the decade game, or one of the very top decade games, the most bottomful games.
Speaking of, to take the more personal angle on it, then I think that's the other side to this, right? Like, I think my relationship with games has changed very substantially in that time, despite some patterns being quite similar. Like, I am someone who's always had their forever games that they tend to play a lot of, and that's become more acutely the case. But it's also in this period, even in the last 6-7 years of that period, that I've gone over the fence completely, from critic and journalist and magazine gremlin to narrative gremlin, largely similar in many regards, but I feel better about myself. So there is that as well, and that's really changed the way that I encounter games now, honestly, like completely. Like it puts me far less than of a mind to play necessarily everything, so much as to kind of reclaim the games that I do play a lot of more as entertainment even than I did
I feel the same.
when I was on the media side of things and felt more compelled to be in some ways more informed about a broader range of what was happening. It's sort of, I'm almost like, I think I've almost been like, it was just sort of strange working in games and working on games now instead, that I feel more compelled now to think less deeply about the experiences that I'm having when I'm having them for fun, or at the very least to kind of let those experiences sit for a bit before I try and analyze them. And that's been a big change into how I play games from the years where I would spend necessarily feeling like I really did want to formulate pretty strong opinions about most things that were coming out. Partly for the benefit of this podcast. So the change that I describe is actively to the detriment of this podcast. And happy birthday, I suppose. But nonetheless, it's been nice lately to play for the sake of playing, I guess, which has been kind of wasn't the case for a few years in the middle back there, I think. And beyond the games that I would always apologize for mentioning things like Destiny or Dota or something like that. And this year particularly, I found myself like, I'm kind of looking like, I mean, I appreciated the conversation from a few episodes ago about it, but I'm kind of looking forward to Starfield. It keeps creeping up on me, partly because my brain has decided to like internally pronounce it Garfield, which has just broken it for me, but it's made the word Starfield not mean anything anymore. But the other is because it's like it occurred to me, the other kind of big thing is like, Skyrim was 12 years ago now, and that was a game I played a ton of up in the years preceding starting this podcast while I was a PC gamer in those first years I was there. And as anodyne as their world building appears to be, there's part of me that's like, I'm quite excited to just play this, but with no preconceptions and just lose myself in this kind of melange, whatever it is, and that's kind of exciting personally. That and Baldur's Gate 3, I think, are the things that have kind of got me excited to play more, I suppose.
I'm kind of enjoying, I had the same experience as you, Chris, and I'm enjoying not having to have an opinion on stuff.
I've got bad news about what the rest of this podcast is going to entail, by the way.
But it means that I've been able to go back to things. So long after it came out, I've been sort of slowly going through the Hitman games. I mean, the second, like Hitman 2 sort of set at the moment, very steadily. Ratchet and Clank, played that. Why? I don't know. It was there. Had a nice time. Nothing to say about it. and that's deeply freeing. Love it. It was interesting. Way back when I was a journalist, I was always quite sort of vaguely surprised when you talk to a developer and they'd be kind of ignorant about what's going on in the industry, like what games are coming out, what the kind of the big discussion points of the day were. And he said, like, Christ, you make games. Surely you must be aware that the thing where the thing that you're making fits into the overall, art and commerce of the video game. And now I know why, because they got to focus on the thing they're doing. And also it's quite a sort of very sliver of people, like thin sliver of people that, journalists, it's that sort of journalist bubble that they are on top of stuff. And I think they are, we were identifying the kind of the important stuff and discussing it in meaningful ways. But now I don't do that. No, I don't do that. I don't do that anymore. And I don't miss it. And, and yeah, it's odd.
We started in a graveyard and we ended in a graveyard. To put a finer point, I think one thing that's kind of interesting looking back across the span of the decade is, so I agree with you, and I think that's been my experience as well, of like not being as aware of discourse necessarily. Like I still read Twitter, but God knows that's unreliable in terms of what it surfaces. My observation is that kind of mass discursive practice or community doesn't exist in the way that it used to. Now, that might be completely false. Like, it could be that it's moved, but my observation would be that it feels like it's, there are more people making commentary on games of one kind or another, whether that's videos or writing or podcasts, but it feels like it's siloed quite heavily, either within the community around a particular genre or a particular game even, or based on the medium, or based on any other kind of subdivision of, like, almost like that era around 2013, 2014, 2015, there was a big blurring of lines as people started to direct a lot more critical attention towards what were considered indie games at the moment that are just games, right? Like, when you think about the big kind of epochal changes in that period, when was the last time you heard someone meaningfully use the word indie?
Yeah.
I just don't think of it in those terms anymore, because, other subdivisions kind of exist now, whether that's like, is this an Annapurna style game or something like that, right? Like, big indie, small indie, medium indie, like, sort of lost their distinction. A lot of those sort of patterns have resolved themselves. It's kind of interesting. Like, I don't want to deny that it probably does still exist in places. I think it certainly does, but I feel like it's not just that we have, it's perhaps it is the children who have changed. No, what I mean is, it's like, it's not simply that our relationships with games have changed and that's changed the kind of the way that we engage with them. I genuinely think that the era changed as well. Right.
I mean, I agree completely, and would add that I also think that this might be a point of kind of just getting older as well, but I'm also much more conscious. I think back in the me and Marsh sort of entered game journalism in like 2007 or something. It was 2007, and I certainly grew up with kind of the old game magazines where big opinions were had, and kind of tribes would kind of rise around certain viewpoints, but there weren't very many of them, and it was all a big game. It felt like a big game where you'd kind of, I love this thing, this platform, or this particular kind of big game or whatever. These days, and increasingly, I've just been more aware that it's not really a game. That there are real feelings. I'm conscious of the effort that people put into things that turn out badly and are laughable. Would have been laughed at easily in a long time ago. I think the world is a bit, not exclusively, but the parts of the world that I kind of respect and want to be associated with are more sensitive to all that stuff. It's not just a big fun game anymore, following games. It's more nuanced and richer and deeper and more human than it ever was when I was watching journalism, reading journalism, and then getting into it.
Yeah, it does feel like it's not, you're not like the scamp slapping EA across the shins and running away, what I mean? Or like, doing it.
Yeah,
like,
and reading that writer who's just really good at doing takedowns. I just love it,
Yeah, I feel like, I feel like that, to me, that started to die years ago with everything that happened online in the middle part of the last decade. And the way the gaming community changed. But also I agree that it's also a function of moving into game dev that, like, there are games that I will certainly be critical about, probably on this podcast, but fucking hell is it. I'm just impressed anyone ships anything, frankly. And you should get a prize for that. I had a real reminder of this lately, and I don't think this is any one person's fault, but there was PC Gamer, that old place to which we share a connection, did, I think, a very funny tweet. And I think because of the kind of brand or editorial voice dissolving power of the internet, which robs everything of its context and its joy, this was passed around as if it were real for a long time. So the tweet was about Diablo 4, and to quote, the tweet was, Diablo 4's Helltide events now let you earn rare uniques from tortured gift chests. Rumor has it that future patches will let you foment Payne shards by transmorphing wound imps into malfeasance tokens instead of having to distress your own affliction coins. Now, That's a very funny piece of writing. That's like very like old school. Like that's kind of my memory of the PC gamer sense of humor, right? Like it cuts very close to the bone, so much so you can't tell it's parody, but it is parody. And there's a very funny screenshot taken from the opening cutscenes of a sort of, rhyme bitten villager from a shithole in Diablo 4 knifing someone with a big smile on their face. And I saw that everywhere on Twitter for about a week of people either making fun of Diablo or making fun of PC Gamer, nobody getting that it was a joke. and part of me was like, yeah, that's kind of the difference, isn't it? Like we're in the that's the sort of the specific understanding of the editorial voice of the outlet or the team you like, is the context that is stripped in the content digestive system we suckle from. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, and so that was an awful analogy, and I won't apologize for it. You're not getting any better. I've had most of my gin, and that was a bit of a marker. So I was like, oh yeah, times they do change, don't they?
Yep. Context collapse has definitely occurred. It's not like the old days where you had your magazines and you knew your audience pretty well.
Yeah.
Is there a good thing that's happened? He declared. Marsh, I'm going to pick the wrong person for this. Marsh.
Oh, no. Shit. I think we've realized that the metaverse is a lot of shit, right?
Yeah.
And that is a good thing.
I did, and I anecdotally have this experience last week. So I've been to every Develop, the industry conference in the UK down in Brighton. I've been to every one of them since it reopened after COVID, and going to Develop from a biz dev point of view, from a recruitment point of view, is always quite a lot of good reason. It's always very packed and kind of engaged, lots of engaged people, particularly good for meeting like graduates and people looking for a bit of guidance at the start of their career. That's all very worthwhile. But there's always a band, not a band like as in like a musical band. Like there's always there's a strata of like occasional biz dev weirdo you got to encounter, and it has evolved in every Develop that I've done, even in the space of 3 years. A couple of years ago, metaverse. Last year, NFTs and Web3. This year, AI. But the crucial thing is, in every year, the previous generation's weirdos have just gone. Like they've just been removed from the encounter table. So it was kind of amusing to see.
It's not the same weirdos then, evolving year on year?
No, not that I can tell. Not that I can tell. I think there's some overlap, but it tends to be. Last year, someone gave me a business card that was just several business cards, and they were all just different stock photos of women. And then on one side of it, it said Web3, and the other side was an email address. What did it mean? What did it mean? Don't know.
Surely you found out when you immediately got home and typed an email to that very address. I mean,
yeah.
There are good things. Good things. I've thought of a good thing, and that is that games in general have diversified a huge amount in terms of the content and type of game. Like, people, we've evolved as an industry to the point where people now roll their eyes at the idea of cozy games. I mean, the fact that people are bored of that as a substrate of games is amazing.
Here's my positive, said Marsh. An uptick in scorn. I've sensed it in my spleen. I'll survive another winter.
Delicious. But the fact that people can be scornful of new things is itself a great achievement.
I mean, so what you're saying is we've achieved a sufficient diversity of experience that a kind of a healthy cynicism can now spread omnidirectionally rather than just towards the worst offenders, even touching completely undeserving folk. Fantastic. I just think there are more better games now of a wide variety of types and more acceptance of diversity of games than there has ever been, right? Like, so many arguments are just simply gone around what graphical fidelity represents in a new game or what budget represents. Like, those things were tiresome arguments a decade ago. They're just basically gone. You have something like, can you imagine, like, I don't think I've ever heard a sniff of somebody leveling a, oh, but it doesn't look amazing argument at like Vampire Survivors or even like Among Us or something. Like these things can just become phenomena because they deserve to be on their own merits. And that's not just accepted by like a narrow circle of, dickheads who are trying to sound like they've got one over edge.
Where are the people who railed against walking simulators now? I mean,
right.
Surely, I mean, put a microphone in front of them and see if they've changed their minds, because surely they have.
Right, or they haven't, and we don't hear them anymore. Right, like it's just accepted that games can be a wide variety of things, and I think that's the best outcome. Right, just acceptance that games can be a wide variety of things now, and that financial success or audience success can flock towards games regardless of some sort of expectation set by marketing around sort of like tech hype or something like that. And particularly, and I will say this as someone who kind of tries to bear in mind the needs of like a younger audience as well, a lot of that's not just kind of embodied in like online games communities, but just simply in like how a new generation is consuming games. And I think that's really heartening. That they are, given that it's such a difficult form of entertainment to pin down in terms of what the fuck it is, whether it's very Ludo or not very Ludo at all, and everything in between.
Yeah.
The fact that it can be embraced as simply like entertaining thing you do with your computer is that's good. That is a good thing, and I'm not going to keep talking to the point where I feel the need to caveat that.
I think there is a sort of quite an interesting sophistication about the way that some games, and I think all digital media is kind of enjoyed and understood. Like what you said about Vampire Survivors. You look at Among Us and things as well. These huge games, which where their design is entirely appropriate to what they set out to do, and that so many people immediately understand that. They're not coming to it with kind of sort of alien sort of expectations set by unreasonable things. Like I think in the past, I think games, as you were saying, sort of the idea that sort of fidelity was everything was or like everything had to be 3D. These different waves of kind of expectation that came about in the past. There's this sort of enjoyment of the creative decisions made by game makers, and I think everyone's a bit more playful around with that stuff, which I've enjoyed. Like Vampire Survivors, I think, is a perfect example. It is so playful with all the things that it's going for. Its relationship with Castlevania and sort of 8-bit, 16-bit games, but all the other things it's going for as well, and the fact that it's meant to run on kind of in browsers and on phones and this sort of thing. Like the sort of as a thing of technical and communicative kind of media, I think it's really interesting, and the audience kind of laps it up. That's cool.
Nice.
Isn't it weird though that there's still not like, I mean, the New York Times doesn't have a dedicated video games section still.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, the BBC doesn't really cover video games in any substantial way, in the same way that it would big movie launches or anything like that. There's still that kind of lack of literacy in a certain strata of our society, which produces a lot of culture.
Yeah, I mean, is it not also an overlap with a sort of like an aging population to some extent, right? Mm-hmm. That like to the same extent that the BBC or the New York Times have not been forced to adjust to the needs of a younger audience because the older audience is still there, and the younger audience is not reading the New York Times, or looking at the BBC.
I think that they've either made experiments, like was it Washington Post that did have a video game sort of department and then closed it recently. So there have been experiments like that, and I'm sure the other publications, August or publications, have looked at those and seen them as failures and decided not to go down the same way. I mean, I don't know why for them they were failures. I mean, I certainly think that games are covered very well elsewhere. Would I ever go to the Washington Post, even if it didn't have a paywall? Would I ever go there to get my games fix? Probably not.
I think it's an interesting one because I would also contrast it with their coverage of pop culture generally. Like, it's not to say that games are exclusively pop culture, but that is largely where they live. And I think, I think the model of applying traditional journalistic practice to games has produced some really, really good stuff. It absolutely has. But it's kind of often an odd fit. Like, the thing I associate it with is sort of like quite worthy and often worthwhile deep dives into the artistry of a certain game or the history of a certain creator. And that stuff can be worthwhile, but it's not necessarily what sells games as pop art to people, right? Like, more often than not, these are pretty colorful, lurid experiences of one kind or another, arguably kind of like the sort of the most lurid entertainment form that exists. And that is not a thing to be embarrassed about. That's a quality that games have. To the extent that pop art generally should be like surfacing and making accessible a wide range of experiences, but also within a kind of exciting parcel. Games do that really well, but it's often traditionally not something that, sort of traditional media or like broadsheet media or something is comfortable talking about in its own terms. They don't talk about action films this way, right? Like they, well, very rarely. Something has to be taken as a kind of high culture artifact of some kind in order to receive that treatment. And so what I'm saying, I suppose, is that I would take the absence of that kind of like broad coverage of games less as, well, I think it's partly generational. I think it's partly that games are resistant to the, dare I say it, like high culture posturing of traditional media generally.
Yeah.
And attempts to do that are too often a apologia.
I definitely think that sort of reading certain papers' coverage of games, it reads completely differently to all their other coverage, and I don't know whether it's just because they have to be written in the way that I'm familiar with them. I mean, they read like game websites, like specific that only write about games, and they don't have that sort of breadth of voice. I don't know if it's a sort of sense of self-confidence. I don't know what it is that I get from the film pages and things, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that though, but like, yeah, I do, but also like, I feel like, I mean, I think almost every, we just talk about criticism. I appreciate we've been talking about this for like a full 45 minutes now, but like, just talk about criticism. Like, I find that almost every branch of criticism is weird in its own way, right? Like,
True.
film criticism is deeply strange, often highly idiosyncratic, often wildly, kind of derived from, partly because I think this is a complete kind of back pocket take, by which I'm pulling it bottomfully from behind. But like, I sometimes get the feeling with film criticism that like it often feels like outlets reviewing movies have kind of given up on the idea that they're serving a specific need for a specific audience and are more a kind of just pitching a take into a kind of sea of aggregated discourse for the entertainment value, which is not incorrect, but often you just get kind of wildly sort of disconnected kind of rambles or columns basically that are sort of loosely connected to a movie and they're stapled to a particular broadsheet because they know that their audience is not actually going to go and see, I don't know, the new Mission Impossible film or something like that. So they might as well just write like a 400-word piece about like trains or something. And then, a meditation on whether Tom Cruise is actually old or not, because that's a subject of relevance to the audience. And then go back to sleep.
I was looking at Slate's sort of cultural output recently, and it's very much kind of geared towards. I mean, maybe this isn't anything to do with the evolution of games. This is more to do with the evolution of criticism as it is refracted through an internet that requires hits and the entire mechanism of generating those hits. So everything is it doesn't seem to do like reviews anymore. Everything is about finding, as Chris was describing, like the hook into something, like the trains in terms of Mission Impossible. But it's like, Oppenheimer is a mind-blowing movie, but how is it a history? And Christopher Nolan is for the girlies, an opinion piece. They're all kind of like micro opinions that bounce off a particular cultural moment rather than any kind of form of criticism. And I wonder if just the entire industry that's now dedicated towards producing that kind of chicken feed has meant that we don't see. It's true of games as well. Like we just don't talk about any kind of media in the same way that we used to.
Maybe another factor here is that films, beyond some kind of like big shifts around things like the cinematic universe that have kind of dominated things for the last couple of years, broadly speaking, haven't significantly changed in what a film is for decades, certainly, generational span of time, right? In terms of what it means to go to the obviously there are major inflections like streaming and so on, but in terms of what a film is, it's fairly understood, and there's a lot of trust that understanding can kind of echo up and down the audience, right? You understand that a film is like a 90-minute to forever experience with star actors, a story, and so on, and that's kind of the form it takes. Games are far more diverse than that. And so I suppose my point is there is potentially the point that like games will always be hard to reduce in the way that we're talking about, because shared understanding or a shared kind of baseline from which to kind of relate to the audience is really not forthcoming. At genre level, you can do, right? Talk about shooters or open world games or something like that, you can. But, as games diversify in the way that we've said, and as the audience diversifies, it gets harder and harder to be like, oh, have you played the latest game? Because it means so many different things, right? It could mean the latest kind of engagement farm mobile game. It could be Oxenfree 2. It could be the latest blockbuster AAA thing. And the differences between those experiences and the differences in how those experiences are accessed are so diverse and so broad that actually game as a concept is harder to pin down, and therefore harder to kind of turn into chicken feed in that particular way. Which is to say that we should still, after 10 years, be having tiresome arguments about what games are.
Can I just read you this headline from Slate's Culture Feed?
Yeah.
Forget Ken, the hot boy of summer is ... Napoleon Bonaparte.
For fuck's sake.
And I am clicking on that, so I'll read that later. They've won. Well, we've talked at length about the diversification of games. Shall I talk to you about a game in which a drunken, washed-out male protagonist who is now bald shoots a lot of people from a developing country?
I guess. For old time's sake, let's do it.
I went back to Max Payne 3.
Wow.
Somebody's maximally remedy pilled.
Well, it's actually Rockstar pilled because it wasn't made by I just replayed LA Noire for similarly unfathomable reasons.
Wow.
What's going on, Marsh?
Yeah, were you okay?
Well, no, I mean, maybe it's to do with what Alex was saying earlier, where we have this huge backlog of games and we're not necessarily under pressure to generate takes and follow trends. And so I felt free to return to a catalogue of yesteryear. And LA Noire was a very instructional playthrough, actually, because it does a lot of incredibly ill-advised things in terms of narrative design. So it was fun to go through it again. And I think overall the story that it tells is actually really good and not well told at all points, but the kind of bones of it are a great noir story with interesting characters who go on interesting arcs, not always expressed in the best possible way, but I did enjoy going back to it. Max Payne 3, on the other hand, is such a thing of its time in a way which few games are Well, actually, mate, games are much more easy to pinpoint, I think, than other kind of medium because of the trend in graphical fidelity. Although now, as you were saying earlier, like games can come out with any kind of number of polys and nobody bats an eyelid. So maybe that's not really as easy a dipstick. I don't know what that is. Do you use a dipstick to measure time?
Yes. Mostly, yeah. One of the major time measurers.
What time is it, Alex?
It's 3 on the dipstick.
But it's a really weird collision of that sort of 30 seconds of fun, physicsy bullet time combat that, you know, is the hallmark of Max Payne. And then that's kind of really weirdly meshed with Rockstar's cinematic aspirations, because you're constantly being yanked out of control of the game by cutscenes. Like literally every 30 seconds, you shoot a bunch of guys, and then suddenly, oh, okay, I don't get to pick up that gun that I need. Instead, I have this cutscene, and it's interesting because they're not as expressive. The characters simply just aren't able to wear enough expressions to be able to bear the kind of dramatic weight being put on them. But like it's characterized, the aesthetic of it's characterized in a way which was obviously very zeitgeisty at the time, and it's such an interesting thing to do that, because it's such a double-edged sword, you know, because you crest that zeitgeist at the perfect moment. You can maximize your success in like the 6-month window in which your game is released, but then you look exponentially more lame thereafter.
What is its feel? I remember a flowery shirt. What else was going on with that game? Its tone.
I was going to compare it actually, and it isn't similar to this in its aesthetic, but it just reminded me of the taste you get with the Marvel opening cinematic of Secret Invasion, where it's been partly used with AI to construct, and aside from being like really tone deaf to the complaints of artists and animators and actors and writers, like whoever else is on that picket line, it just pinpoints that aesthetic of like early mid journey to a month in 2022, where that kind of digi slurry of half recognizable shapes was like momentarily startling and a new thing, and now nobody likes it because everybody hates AI, hates it, and all the evangelists of it also hate it because it looks like an inferior version of the thing they're now hawking. But anyways, to get back to Max Payne, it's sort of, so it's very Tony Scott is, I think, its main touchstone. It has this thing where it's constantly using this flickering, dilating double exposure thing with like scan lines, and then
like the Kane and Lynch era of
but it's a Kane and Lynch. Oh, that is still special though. Kane Lynch 2, isn't it? 2, I think 2.
I can't remember which Kane and Lynch it was that did the handheld
video thing. Yeah,
but that was consistent in, I think, the framing of it. Whereas here, it's all about constantly disrupting the framing. So, like, not only do you get this kind of weird juddering effect overlaid onto the 3D scene you're looking at, but like text will be overlaid on it whenever somebody says something important, or often just the nouns of what they're saying. Like, you know, Max will have a voiceover saying, Rodrigo made money. There was a lot of it, and it was dirty as hell. And the word money, dirty, will flash up on the screen. It'll be kind of like cleverly inserted into some part of the 3D geometry. And like, I guess that was cool at some point. But no, that was cool at some point, because that kind of non-diegetic use of 3D space was very novel. That like wasn't a thing that could easily be done previously, and so it was exciting to see it. And now it's very annoying. And there's also kind of like, it's set in Sao Paulo, and so it has the Hollywood agreed level of sepia and it's sort of hyper-violent tourism, which was also beloved at a particular time. So it has a lot of kind of that cavalier, masculine aura of particularly Tony Scott films of the time. Did I say Ridley Scott earlier, or did I say Tony?
No,
Scott?
you said Tony.
Oh, good. It does have a good soundtrack, though. Health soundtrack is still great, but maybe that's maybe that's because I'm 40 years old and I still listen to Massive Attack. That's all I have to say about it, though, because I haven't played very much of it. But it's a remarkable use of the time dipstick. Very precise.
Max Payne, time dipstick. He slows down time.
It's true. He does.
He makes time oily.
He does. He plumbs the depths of time, withdraws it, looks at it, and goes, yeah, you're going to have to strip the whole thing out. The bottom-full plumb bob of time. What the fuck are we talking about? What am I talking about?
Tell me about a new game instead.
I've got a new game.
All right.
It's not that new game. It's quite a new game. Mr. Sun's Hatbox.
Beg your pardon?
It's a lovely game. Tell me, do you like Spelunky?
Yeah.
Do you like fultoning stuff in Metal Gear?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you like Rogue Legacy and games where you have characters with terrible, terrible things that they do, attributes that you have to kind of deal with?
Sure.
Yeah. Then I can recommend to you Mr. Sun's Hatbox. It is like a sort of obviously it's a roguelike sort of an affair. The story is very slight. You are Mr. Sun, and you've sent away for a hat to be delivered to you. But just as the Amazon deliverer arrives at your doorstep, the nefarious Mr. Moon and his goons steal the Hatbox and run away with it. The Amazon deliverer says, "Oh no, I'll get you back your Hatbox. Just stay there." And Mr. Sun is just left there, going, "It's okay, don't worry." But the Amazon deliverer goes off anyway. This spurs the Amazon deliverer to develop a huge military base under Mr. Sun's house, and because it also is a bit like XCOM, where you set up different rooms, in that kind of your base, and each of the rooms has a different function. And in here, you are recruiting people that you fulton out of levels, so that you can use them as the character that you go into levels with, and if they die, they permanently die. And it is a Spelunky-like, extremely sort of systemic sort of platformer where one thing often leads to another, and it's got a much more chaotic than Spelunky, which can get quite chaotic at times, of course. But this is batshit most of the time. And your characters that you fulton out and then use all have terrible proclivities, such as fainting whenever you kill someone. And with kind of Tom Francis style kind of timing. Tom's kind of sort of slapstick sort of when people fall over, they're straight on the floor kind of sort of comedy timing. You just fall to the floor for about a second every time you kill somebody, and you kill a lot of people, and so you're always falling to the floor. There's one that's sort of just got lazy eyes and just keeps blinking all the way through, so you can't see anything for sort of a little while. There's one that can't hear anything, so there's no sound. You grow to love these things just because they just sort of throw even more chaos into the mix. And if you can get them through missions, which sort of the mission's a bit like, sometimes you have to kill a particular character, a particular sort of NPC, sort of little guy in an area. Sometimes you have to fulton out a little guy in the area. Sometimes you have to get an item from an area, because you can fulton anything you like out of a level. Hats, guns, weapons in general, and other characters. Once you get a character back to your base, you have to mind control them. So that's a room that you have to build and set them out in. So it takes a couple of kind of playing through levels to get them on your side, and they're just in a roster after that point, with all of their problems laid bare. It's a really funny game. It's a very, very funny game, and it would be frustrating because of that chaotic element. But it has a real sense. It's slapstick. It's brilliantly slapstick. weapons are kind of, if you pick up a gun, it'll have three, I think it's got 2 or 3 shots in like a handgun style thing. And you will probably miss. And once you've done all you've shot through all the ammunition, you can just throw it at somebody, and that will do as good as killing them. You can knock people out, but then they will get up quite quickly afterwards. There's a sort of certain level of AI to them, so that they'll kind of search for you if you've kind of got their attention. You can somewhat stealth. You can jump behind people and not be seen and kind of try and get past them that way. That will go wrong. But there's kind of quite a lot of depth where a lot of the buildings and the things that you want the buildings to be doing for you, a lot of items that you want to craft and things, require you to go into levels and find certain like weapons or hats of certain types. Just a quick note on the hats. The hats will give you other abilities, like a hard, so one of those yellow sort of construction hard hats will allow, if something jumps on your head, you won't be knocked out. There's one that has a spring in it, and it causes anything jumping on it to bounce high in the air. It's that kind of game. You'll be going into levels with a specific aim in mind, as well as the mission. The missions might be, as I said, to kill a certain character or whatever, to succeed at it, and then you've got to escape. You'll also be trying to find certain items so you can progress the other things going on in your base. So it has a really nice kind of crunchy, well, crunchy isn't the word, that really sort of flowing feel of kind of like, I'll play another level just so I can, just in case I find that hat and I can progress that particular project and that kind of thing. It's really good. It's also by Kenny's son. He did way back Circa Infinity, which was this sort of incredibly, it's like a platformer, but it was all, with these concentric lines and circles and colors, sort of patterns coming out, and it was quite sort of head fucky. Twinfold was a really cool take on threes that he made, which I was really into. Really nice little characters. He's made lots of really interesting games. There's nothing quite like Mr. Sun's Hatbox, and I really recommend it. It's good. It's a good, fun game from this year.
Excellent. That sounds great. Is that on Steam, Alex? It's
on Steam, yeah. It's on Switch as well.
Oh, marvellous. Shall I talk about a thing that I've been playing very briefly? Because I feel like the things I've been playing lately do not necessarily lend themselves to fresh new takes, because they've been quite well trodden over. So in the case of, I was listening to everybody else's takes on Diablo 4, which everyone's been playing, obviously, and I agree 100%. So I don't have much to add there in terms of it's incredible how fine a game can be, just how 100% sure it is. Defiantly okay. I have, I guess, three funny moments and a take for you. That's really what I've got, to be honest, to yield from my many hours of this game so far. One is, I was very tickled. I was playing the other day and I got a quest reward at the end of helping some, shitty little villager through a shitty situation of their own making, where they had, I don't know, gone to the woods once and now they have to be exploded, which is all the stories in that game. And I opened the little fucking matchbox they give you at the end of it, and it exploded, and there on the ground was, and this is the name of the item, an awful medal. Just an awful medal. And I felt like in that moment the game completely commented on itself. It's like, that's what I do get. That's what I get for everything in this game. I perform an awful task, which is fun to do, and I get an awful medal. So I enjoyed that. I'm playing a lot of this game. And then I recently had an event where another player and I were rushing through the wilderness, when suddenly it popped up that I had 53 seconds left if I was to slay the claustrophobic skeleton. And I actually think this might be a pre-written bit rather than a fun moment of randomization, but I just find the notion of a claustrophobic skeleton very funny. Is that just a person with anxiety? Possibly.
Did you know?
Oh, yeah. Oh yeah, handily in time. And then finally, in terms of my fun moments in Diablo, I had a good one today. I was playing it on lunch while listening to the podcast about it to make sure that I didn't have anything to add, because I truly don't. And I did one of the public events, or like the open world events, where somebody is. I'd done it once before, and it's the one where somebody is trapped under their caravan. And if you go and talk to them, they will either turn out to be a tricky little dickhead who's summoning their bandit friends, or genuinely in need, and it changes the nature of the event that follows. In this case, genuinely in need because of spiders. And I clicked on them, and then the mission pops up, which is like, you've got to fend off waves of spiders, and you get the bonus reward if they don't die. Makes sense? Cool. Then I've done that once before with one of them. And then in this case, there were 2 caravans, and each caravan had one person trapped under it, and they were kind of facing each other, and that was quite fun for its own sake. Like, what are the chances it happened to both of us? And anyway, so I protected them from that and did that successfully. But after that event was concluded, my inventory was completely full. So I portaled out, went back to Kyovashad, the kind of big capital city, salvaged all of the gear that I didn't need for bits, stuffed all of the gems in my stash, and popped back through my town portal scroll, only to come back to the same event having spawned again. So I popped back out, and now there were 3 carriages with 3 people trapped underneath it, and I just triggered it again and did it again. And it did feel like the kind of like, have you learned nothing? Have you learned nothing? Like, I just helped you with this. You could have left, and you've actually got someone else stuck here as well. Like, I'm not always going to be popping back forth through this magic portal. And then I went back and tried it again after that, but after that they were simply gone, replaced by ghosts. It was quite fun though. So those are the 3 times I've been like above average amused by Diablo so far. Like, I don't hate it. But I was thinking about it, and I was trying to figure it out, because I think it is a really fascinating study and a very well-crafted game, which has many qualities, but that is like so okay that it's quite hard to articulate exactly why. And I think I figured it out for myself, at least. So I wanted to offer this as a kind of addendum to the takes on Diablo. I think it is really interesting that, and I think all of the elements of this are in that conversation, but for me, it's a particular combination of things. So this is a game about fighting monsters, but in almost all circumstances, you can't see the monsters. You can't see them. Like, literally, like, you're fighting a swarm of bees, which I know is a Diablo tradition, and an indistinct ghoul on a muddy background. So you can't really see them. But also, and that would be like a critical flaw in most games, but also that doesn't matter at all. And I think it's in the tension between those 2 things. I can't see, and it doesn't matter, that the ennui arrives. Right? Because, so, like, my play style is to go, I'm a necromancer, and it's to go into a region, I hit the first person, that means the first person spawns a corpse at their feet, which is very funny. I then press a button on the corpse, which means the corpse pulls all nearby monsters towards it, and then I right-click on them and they all die. And this is almost always works. And at the moment they get pulled together, they pop up as a purple health bar because I've made them vulnerable. And that's it. That's the entire loop. And so all of my focus is on purple health bar, click, not purple health bar, wait for purple health bar, click. And so I become it, even though like it should be an issue, the enemy visibility is so poor given when compared to other elements of the UI and experience, it isn't, because the gameplay is forgiving enough and UI driven enough to pull me out of it. And I think it's those 2 things that keep you in this suspended state between immersion and, like, if it got to the point where the visual style collapsed your ability to play, then I think you'd say that the immersive cost was too great of it being dark. But because it doesn't matter, it kind of prevents you from complaining about it, and that kind of keeps you in this tension. That's my feeling about it, right? Like, where it's like, if it, where it's actually really simple. It's like, I spend a lot of this game, and if you asked me like what any given character on the screen was doing, I wouldn't be able to tell you. And most of the time, that's a bit of a fail state for UX in games, right? Like, I just cannot see anything. But in Diablo, it doesn't matter because it's sufficiently UI driven that it keeps you above that. I don't know. I'm not sure if that's resonant to your experience, Marsh, but
Yes, it is, but I don't think that necessarily exculpates it.
Oh no, it doesn't.
Like I think it could almost be completely abstracted to being a UI game. Like you say, like if you're playing with one other person, even, and certainly if you're playing with two other people, any combat you get into is instantly incoherent to the point that it literally doesn't matter what's happening on screen. You're just looking at the buttons at the bottom and clicking them in the order that you have to click on them. I think that just led in almost entirely to my disengagement with what was going on. I
did play quite a bit of Diablo 3. Diablo 3 wasn't like that.
No,
right?
Diablo 4 is a lot darker. Like,
Yeah.
and when I mean that, I don't mean like in a highfalutin way. It's just very dark.
Oh, sure. Aside from the fact that you could see in Diablo 3, I didn't spend time looking at the UI. Like I was felt I was dodging around and making choices and things.
Yeah, I'm saying there's none of that.
I might be just misremembering that.
Well, from what I understand, from what Tom was saying, as a greater Diablo expert than myself, Diablo 3 was something of an aberration within the Diablo series in that actually the skill sets you assembled had more synergies that you had to think about and enact consciously. Yeah. Whereas Diablo 4 moves your choices largely away from what you're doing in the moment to what items you will equip in order to get stat boosts. So all of the decisions that you've made that really affect combat occur when you're equipping your character. And actually, moment to moment, there's not a lot going on in its little brain.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting one because I don't want to get too deep in it because I do want to talk about intentional darkness in games and because I find it really interesting, right, as a thing where it looks amazing, sort of, and I think it's interesting to me that the kind of the decisions are all sensible ones, but they clash quite as much as they do, to the extent that I find it interesting from a decision-making process, from a design decision-making process, that the relative passivity of its combat system, the fact that it doesn't hugely matter what you do, allows it to be very difficult to read. Otherwise, the issues of it being very difficult to read would have come up more in playtesting if it was asking more of you. And that's why I find it interesting. Like that allows what I think is a fairly skew-if design, or certainly a little bit of an incoherent one, to work, because the systems enable each other, but they hold each other at this kind of like unsteady kind of middle space between either being committed to one thing or the other thing. Particularly because I think the weighting of effects is really weird. Like, so as I say, like playing a necromancer, I have a ton of minions and the summons. Skeletons, my own skeletons, are massive and glow bright blue from the inside. And so they're much more visible than any enemy. And just if you were to sit down and go like, what do I need to be more aware of, enemies or my own minions? And obviously I need to be somewhat aware of my minions, but I don't control them directly. So it's okay if they're more like a kind of ambient effect that's running around and doing things. It's really interesting that they're weighted the other way around. And it's a lot of small things like that where it's like, actually, this feels like it should be the opposite, right? Like I should be mostly aware of my minions and very aware of enemies. It's completely the opposite. But yeah, I think
those design choices came first, because I agree with you. There's probably some. I mean, it's been in development for a long time, so the balance of readability versus to what extent the game relies on play exclusively through the UI. Like, I wonder which one of those decisions ended up first and which one they were mitigating for through the creation of the other.
Right. Yeah, I almost wonder if the way the systems are set up makes them resistant to quality assurance is interesting, because they ameliorate each other, right? Where in that argument, both decisions could have been made in parallel and simply not be called out as an issue because they kind of work. You know, it's the issue of the thing that can kind of limp along because it doesn't break, right? And I find that very interesting, because I mean, it's very enjoyable on its own merits a lot of the time. But I was trying to get to the bottom of why exactly it felt quite empty in the way that it did to me, and I think it is, the lack of connection that comes from simply not paying attention to sort of moment by moment action in that way. Because also, I will say, I don't feel like I'm wholly playing through the UI. I had a bug today or yesterday where the sound cut out completely. And it's just in Diablo, it's just an issue, and it came back after a moment. But when I lost the sound effects, the experience felt suddenly extremely empty. You know, so it's not like I'm just playing a menu, right? Like there is something kind of visceral I'm getting from it. And I realized I'm listening to it really closely because I actually get more information about when my abilities have affected characters or triggered than from the UI, from the sound, than I do from the visuals, because the visuals are so overloaded. And I just find it really interesting. I feel like it's a tuning pass from working in some ways. But also, yeah, I don't want to kind of bang on it necessarily. But I did also I wanted to use that as a springboard to talk about, and I appreciate I mentioned this game earlier, but how much I'm enjoying Hunt at the moment for the same reasons. And I don't know if you're playing it at the moment, Marsh, because it's had a big update.
No, I'm not. I need to get back into it because they've added a big crocodile.
They have added a big crocodile. I want to talk about big crocodile, but so it's a big update. Lots of assorted stuff, and Hunt's been expanding rapidly for a while. I think it's had a big sale as well, so there's been a lot of new players and things. But yeah, so the big kind of flagship feature in Hunt is it's now got its first open world boss. So a boss that doesn't spawn in a dingy basement somewhere in one of the many compounds on the map, but a boss that can spawn in the wild. And this is the crocodile, the big old crocodile, and it is a very big crocodile. And the way that works, because it's a bit different, is there's a new kind of clue. The crocodile's called Rotjaw, and Rotjaw is out in the swamp sometimes under certain circumstances, which I'll get to. And you find at the edge of the water in various parts of the map, you will find a big old pile of poo. And if you interact with because it's Hunt Showdown, and if you interact with the poo, a poo tendril will emerge and just point in a direction. And that, I don't think it's actually poo. It's a kind of fetid fecal appendage from the beyond.
Oh,
and it will sort of wiggle towards where the crocodile is. And then eventually you'll find like a body of water where that crocodile be. And occasionally the crocodile will just be hanging out on the bank. And there's quite a lot of fun just on the basic level of like, the crocodile is quite a unique fight compared to other Hunt Showdown. They're all very different. And I think one of the big strengths of Hunt Showdown is how strong the bosses' personalities are in terms of what it takes to fight them and what they're each resistant to and so on. The crocodile, once it's knows it's been spotted or it's seen you, will slip into the water. So it's only on if you catch it napping on the bank, you can take a bomb lance to it and do quite a lot of damage. But once it's in the water, it will stay in the water, and it will only surface if there is a player in the water. So someone has to be bait, basically.
Oh man.
And then it will surge at you. It has a lot of tricks and things. It's very resistant to some of the traditional kind of ways of killing a boss quietly, because trying to melee the crocodile is not a great idea. It tends to come at you real fast. And I mean, it's a bit limited as a horror experience in some ways, because it really won't chase you onto the bank very much, which can sometimes make it feel like you're relatively safe. But you're doing all of this in the open and probably quite loudly, which in Hunt means that you're really exposed. And so that's a lot of fun in and of itself, and means some interesting decisions about how you build, if you're planning on hunting the crocodile and so on. But the other thing is the crocodile only appears in certain circumstances. So the crocodile only appears if it's raining or nighttime, I believe. And there is a playlist at the moment which it guarantees the crocodile. So it also guarantees one of those times of day. And so nighttime has always been super dark in Hunt Showdown, and still is. But they've really improved the weather in this new update. So the rain is extraordinary. Like, it's probably some of the best rain I've seen in a game. And if you have played that game, you know how good its sound design is. Like the sound of torrential kind of, bayou rain on a steel roof is kind of incredible. It makes the entire map much louder. It causes, for example, and it starts and stops raining, so it's not a consistent thing. It will gather and start raining and then stop raining. And they've got great effects for it kind of sheeting off the edge of roofs and stuff like that. It really does look amazing, and it sounds great. And it will have effects like when it starts to rain, all crows in the map will take flight, which can really confuse people because they'll just all start cawing and stuff like that. And so there's all of these different effects. But what this means effectively, and the reason I wanted to talk about it in relation to kind of Diablo, I guess, is Hunt is very much not a UI-driven game. Hunt's a very kind of felt game where you're deriving a lot of information from the game world all the time. And its new mode, its current kind of event, really leans into playing in the dark or in torrential rain when it's really hard to see. And it works really amazingly well, I think. Like I've had a lot of fun with, high visibility hunt, but I've been playing quite a bit with friend of pod Paul lately. We've been running around the swamp quite a bit. But also I've been playing a little bit solo, partly because the new queue is teams of 3. I love going in solo against a team of 3. It's a really compelling, like, it's one of the things that kind of convinced me that I wanted to kind of call out hunt. It's one of the games of the last 10 years on this, is like, there's something, in its best moments, it is also like one of the best stealth games you can play, particularly when the visibility is dialed really far down.
Yeah.
And you are relying on every little sound and every little sniff to try and get the drop on people or make the right choices with information available to you. And, and I've sort of taking advantage of a lot of the things that have been added to its arsenal in the years since it came out, things like the bow and arrow, which I love for that kind of play, like stalking around a map as a sole player, trying to, we've had fun doing things like finding the crocodile and then just waiting because someone else will find it. And it's a great ambush point. And like, it's sort of chaotic open world gunfights where perfect information's very hard to come by, is just, I don't know, it's just the best. And like, they've added some nice stuff now. So like the game does have a proper score screen now. So you can see who the teams were and what happened to them. And that's just a really great additional bit of storytelling. Like, because the great thing about Hunt has always been the lack of information in the game, but putting a little bit of that information after the game so that you can figure out who it actually was that you encountered, who you killed, who killed you, and so on, is really welcome. So yeah, I think I think if people have stepped away from Hunt, now is a very good time to go back to it, because it feels like it's having a bit of one of them good moments where all the pieces are coming together. And I really do recommend getting murdered by a crocodile in a very wet, very dark swamp, because crucially, I think that demonstrates, like, if you're going to make your game dark as shit, that's like, go the whole hog, right? Go the whole croc and really go for it. Because Hunt, when it is dark, you cannot see a fucking thing. You know what I mean? Like, and it's like turn the camera up on your computer and switch the lights off so you can see better dark. And I think it's a really great demonstration that does not have to be a UX failing. It can be really enhancing of the experience overall.
Well, so much of Hunt was always about the information you derive from clues in the environment as to where other people will be, rather than spotting somebody and then sniping them. It's never really, that opportunity does arise occasionally, but it's not one you can rely on.
Yeah,
and I like the idea that they've made choices which sort of maximize that aspect of the game.
They've also done some stuff that I think is like fairly, but so I don't know if you've played it since they added the solo perks.
No, I don't think so.
So you have perks on your character, which might mean, wade faster in water or recover from poisoning faster, or and they all have the best art. They just have the best art, the perks. But now there's a lot of new ones, and some of them you have to get in the game itself, which is quite a nice addition. Some of them are very powerful. But a bunch of them now have a additional or a different effect if you are solo versus if you're in a team. And so those are quite impactful. So one of them, for example, is there's an ability that has traditionally allowed you to expend your own health to revive teammates at a distance. If you're running solo with that ability, it now allows you to res yourself if you die. And that's really big, because it means that if you encounter a solo, you kind of have to burn their body on the off chance that they have that ability. And that creates a lot of different tension and stuff like that. This is all fairly like Hunt Showdown nitpick stuff, but like they've made the solo experience much more forgiving. But actually that's to the benefit of it, because it means that solo players are actually quite a big threat now, which I really like as a dynamic, right? There's certainly an advantage to being 3. There's an advantage to being a solo. And then, I play a lot in 2, and that's its own dynamic. And yeah, it's just the best. It's so good.
A fine game. Perhaps the best of the last 10 years. You played anything else, Alex?
There was another game I wanted to talk about. It is a game where, despite having played it for 6 hours, I feel that I've scratched its surface. It is a JRPG called Labyrinth of Galleria, the Moon Society.
Yeah, sure it is.
Yeah. And of course, there's a follow-up to Labyrinth of Refrain, Coven of Dusk.
Oh,
as you know.
I can see how one follows naturally on from the other there.
It's I do like these games. So that it's an RPG in the mold of Wizardry. There's a sort of this Japanese strand of RPGs which took on the Wizardry sort of. You're in the labyrinth. You're seeing things from a first-person perspective, and you're moving kind of Eye of the Beholder style. A sort of square map unit on turning right angles. Do you know what I mean?
I've played games of that kind, yeah.
Yeah, it's one of them. I really enjoyed way back the Etrian Odyssey games, which were for Nintendo DS, which were really cool because they used the touch screen on the DS so that you could draw the map as you go along. It's a big part of the game. Really felt you felt like a dungeon delver when you played it, which I really enjoyed. This game auto maps, and it's one of those Japanese RPGs where it's such an old genre, like fully plumbed genre, or like almost fully plumbed genre. So they just slap on so many different systems and stuff on the top. And so playing it is a matter of kind of wondering what the fuck this term is. What does it mean? And how do you play with it? And what does it do? But I have found that quite fun, sort of. But what's really interesting about it is that it really fucks around with the tenets of it, where quite early on you get this ability just to break through walls for little cost. Like it costs a certain kind of mana. It's called mana, and you pick up mana from fighting enemies and stuff. Mana's pretty easy to get by, which means you could just bust through walls. And what seems a fairly straightforward dungeon level, suddenly you realize that when you were in that sort of space and you could see, because it's drawn in 3D, and you could see across the way like a large kind of void area, and there was something in the distance, there will probably be a way to get to it if you can just bust through the right walls, and you'll find these secret passages and that kind of thing. And it really playfully kind of busts open a genre which actually, that wizardry formula put you in quite static environments, and then this makes them very dynamic, and it means that you come up with theories like, maybe I can get to that bit if I can just smash my way through this bit. On top of that, you have this little lantern guy called Fancy or Fassy, I don't know, weird name. His little sort of ghostly, sort of lanterny little fella, which can take on all these lots of different abilities, which basically almost UI sort of changes or adaptations or enhancements. So one of them you can pay for in a shop, means that when you try to go forward, which make a forward move into a void, accidentally, that would have sent you falling possibly into the next floor, which does you huge amounts of damage, and also means that you're on a floor where there are loads of very high, much higher level enemies, and it's very dangerous, and you'll get fucked if you try to go anywhere. And if you buy this ability, it'll stop you from falling. So little things like that, which I've always liked games, which kind of I don't know, they're aware of their gameness, and they make part of the game the UI. There's something quite kind of pleasing about that. And it also allows you to sort of feel like, well, I've learned the penalty to falling down something, and now I've got the thing which stops me from doing it. And that's quite a nice little closed loop of a game experience, which it's just strangely fulfilling, despite the fact that you could just not let anyone fall into voids, and that would be fine. But and there are things like sort of enemy sensors, or a thing that tells you the kind of enemy that's coming toward you, what general level it is, and lots of little kind of quality of life things that it sort of slowly allows you to buy over time. I've only played 6 hours of it, and I have really done very little in it so far. But I found it really fun. And if you're into that kind of game, it's a really solid one. The storyline is very. It's like the name. I mean, there are those who seem to enjoy it, but it's a lot of words and kind of terrible, horrible kind of, English voice acting. I turned it to Japanese just to avoid the kind of yowling VO, but or just have it on, just put it on silent or something. And it's really good on a Steam Deck. So yeah, a little frippery, good for a holiday perhaps.
Do you think? I mean, you've played it for 6 hours. Do you estimate that you'll stay with it for the many hour duration that remains?
Let us face reality. Let's face my own soul. No, I will not. But I do want to play more, and there's that.
That's all we can ask. That's all we can ask for.
But yeah, well, something else will come along, won't it? Fucking games.
Always does. Always does.
Something else.
Talking of games that are going to come along, would you like to end this podcast in the most bottomful way possible? i.e. with a quiz?
Oh, fuck yes.
That is the most bottomful.
Happy birthday.
Bottomful quiz.
Yeah, he found the button.
So this is a very bad quiz. Which is the exact kind that I specialize in. You're going to guess from the episode title I'm going to give you what game the title refers to.
Ooh.
Podcast.
This is dangerously close to 10-year anniversary themed content, Marsh. Look at you sneaking a little bit of effort in at the end, you big
swat. He's fucking good, isn't he?
He is.
The odds are stacked against Alex here because he wasn't part of the podcast for several of these.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. But I don't think it helps because none of the podcast titles make any sense. Anyway.
Are you going to give an idea of time or the sort of episode number or year?
I'll give you an idea. I'll read out the full title, including the episode number.
Okay. Are we doing this one at a time, or are we buzzing in, or how's this working?
Well, it's probably not going to work, isn't it? I think you should announce your intention to answer, and whoever gets there first gets
all right,
first.
I'll just make a distressed sound, all right?
You could announce yourself by saying Chris Thurston and then the university you tend to see.
Oh, fuck off.
Okay, don't do that. Make some kind of suitable honking sound, and I will acknowledge one of you as the victor. And because this is basically impossible, I will give you a half pity point if you're close, if you're like within the genre, let's say.
Sure.
So you ready for question 1?
Yeah.
Episode 85. Forget it, Jake. It's Poo Town.
I'm going to guess, fuck it, Jurassic World Evolution.
Do I throw it over to Alex? I don't know.
Yeah, give him a go. Give him a.
So we're looking about late 2014. What came out then? Call of Duty, Black Ops 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. Oh, sorry. I announced my intention to answer Black Ops.
I never announced my intention, actually. Shit.
This is just like Jeopardy. This is how they do it. This is how the pros do it. Neither of you are anywhere near close, really. Cities Skylines.
Of course.
I had a management game.
All right, you get a half a point.
Yeah.
And that is Blue Town, like cities. There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, it had a town in it. Yeah, it wasn't that cryptic in a weird way.
And it was 2000. Yeah, okay, good.
Question 2. Episode 125. An udder full of dollars and a will to kill.
Udder full of dollars and a will to kill.
Hitman. I intentioned... Hitman.
Sonic Racing.
Alex was fully correct.
Yeah. Wow. I mean, will to kill is right there. Like it's,
Yeah.
That's a good
all right.
That's good.
Yeah.
Episode 322. I've seen a raccoon man, so I've had a good time tonight.
We've had fun, haven't we?
Announcing the one with the little raccoon guy in it. Oh, that's a cat.
Come on.
I'm thinking of the story game with the cat in the old industrial failed town in America.
I have no idea what that game is.
A Short Hike.
Crucible, which was Amazon's failed online shooter.
Totally forgot.
Oh, fuck yeah.
Did it have, was its character?
Yeah, the little raccoon man.
Right.
Void. Nil point.
Ugh.
Episode 242. I am the string man with the staring eyes.
These all ring a bell because I think I was present for all of them.
Unravel.
Yes, Alex got it.
Oh, fuck, I'm getting absolutely rinsed here.
It's okay. There's unfortunately there's 9 of these for some reason. There would have been 10, but I actually couldn't. I spent so long trying to find out. You
couldn't find 10 episodes.
No, I could find
some sort of actual link between the title and the game.
I know, and I didn't want to listen to full episodes, so I was skipping through them, trying to find anything that might relate.
I appreciate you almost putting the effort into this.
Episode 53, Sweet Drifts Solve Murders.
I'm going to guess... This feels like... I've got a feeling, because I've probably edited a bunch of these, and I've just got this feeling that this would be one of those, composite titles, maybe? This is a direct quote from the episode.
Need for Speed.
I'll go for 123, did you say?
53.
53, that's the opposite of what I said. Burnout Paradise.
It was The Crew. So you were both in the same...
Okay.
1 point, half point each.
Half point each, yeah. Episode 381, Weird Acid from My Horn Sphincter.
Spite? Scorn.
What was the episode name again?
What the fuck's that game called?
381.
Weird Acid from My Horn Sphincter.
You literally said this, Alex.
Jesus.
Well, actually, you didn't. I think it's an indirect quote. Graham was a little bit more creative when he came up with this title. You did use some of these words.
Oh dear.
Spore.
You've already guessed, Chris.
I'm just guessing words beginning with S that sound kind of similar to each other.
So it's a fairly recent game where you probably sort of something comes out of something on your head, protuberance on your head. I don't know.
It was Warhammer 40k : Battle Sector, one of the most immemorable game names.
Wow.
Oh, it would be Tyranid. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense.
Episode 300, Frightened of the Teen.
I want to answer it's Disco Elysium.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah,
He's got it. Episode 326, The Noble Truth of Nature's Chainsaw.
Valheim.
That's a good guess. Nature's Chainsaw. What is Nature's Chainsaw? A beaver? Fucking Crash Bandicoot.
I'm going to give you a half a point just to make it level. It was Maneater.
Oh yeah,
Game about the shark, which is a bit like a Bandicoot if you think about it.
I think that this is a fix, but fine.
Well, it means there's all to play for on the final question. Episode 391. You can't jostle the ghost clump.
Ooh.
Is
it the Tokyo game with the ghosts in it?
With Ghostwire.
Seems almost too obvious. Is it that re-released Atlas game where you are... Is that Ghostwire Tokyo that I'm thinking of? No, I don't think it is. Is it?
The one where you take pictures in ghost houses? Yeah, no, it's different. What was it called? I can't remember.
Oh, what was that called?
Scary Ghost Photo.
Scary... maybe. Ghost Trick? No.
That was one
too
of the
obvious.
games. Anyway, it's
You
not.
would-
It's not that.
Okay, fine.
It was Vampire Survivors.
Oh,
But the result of this pointless and tiring activity is that you both drew.
Yay!
hey! Thanks for
points,
making that happen, Marsh.
What content?
What
Here's to another
content.
10 years.
Now that's podcasting. Great. Well, that's all of the amount of this we can justify. If actually, that said, we did have a thought, but we'll see if there's any takers on this, because Lord knows if anyone's listening at this point, we'll find out. But we did think that, given that it's been 10 years and it's been a while since we've answered any questions, we might suggest that if people would like us to resurrect questions from questions for one night only, perhaps in the coming weeks, or whether whenever we hit a critical mass, kind of willing to do that. So that sounds fun. So I'll say a thing I haven't said for a while, which is that if you would like to get in touch, send us a question for a future episode, why not do so? You can tweet us at Crate and Crowbar, leave a question on Discord somewhere, I guess, if you like, or email us at questions@crateandcrowbar.com. The reason I hesitate saying that is because I truly haven't checked to make sure that inbox still works. So we're just going to go on this journey together and see if any content falls out, because Lord knows that's just how this works. In the meantime, you can find our website at crateandcrowbar.com, which has a link to our Discord server, as well as many more episodes just like this one, many of them better. You can find said episodes also on youtube.com, which includes things like our Harford Bloodborne playthrough from many years ago now, but worth revisiting if this week's talk of Yarnum has got you yearning for that cephalopod. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about at this point.
Yearning for Yarnum.
Yearning for Yarnum. It was right there, but I felt it was too obvious, so I didn't go for it. But thank you for biting. I was just dangling the low-hanging fruit, and you gave it a big old...
I always pluck it.
You always pluck it. He always toots it. He always plucks it. That's an Alex Wiltshire promise, and it's why we miss him so terribly. What else have I forgotten? Oh, yeah, Patreon. We've got one of those. Thank you to everybody who supports the podcast on Patreon. You can find out more about that at patreon.com/Crate and Crowbar. In the meantime, I've been Chris Thurston, and I can't believe we've been doing this for 10 years. That's kind of nuts if you think about it too much, which I refuse to do. Good night.
I've been Marsh Davis, and I've felt every single minute that has elapsed of these 10 years, and then some.
Fantastic.
And I'm Alex Wiltshire. I've experienced none of the minutes in all that time.
Deathless, whispering revenant that he is. We do have to say it, don't we? For all time's sake. The thing. I suppose. Thanks for listening, everybody. 10 years since you said that wrong for the first time, Mark.
I know.
10 years.
Oh, let it echo down the generations like, the Iliad.
This feels like karmic revenge, incidentally, for the amount of times our community over the years has claimed that it's been 10 years between episodes. That is now finally true of 2 episodes. The first one and this one. You're welcome.